Thanks, everyone. I told you I was going to be back, and I am indeed back. So sorry for interrupting the conversations. I promise you will have time later on. Just before I get started again, if you haven't already logged on to Pigeonhole on your phones, CEDA.pigeonhole.at, jump on there if you want to ask some questions. Otherwise, I might have to make you stand up and shout them from the rooftop. If someone's waving at me from the back, I can't see you. Now, it's my absolute pleasure to invite onto the stage three of CEDA's board members, Diane Smith-Gander, who is, of course, the chair of CEDA and the chair of ZIP, non-executive director of AGL, HBF, Keystart Loans. I'll stop now. Pradeep Philip, who is the lead partner of Deloitte Access Economics, and Ming Long, who is the chair of AMP Capital Funds Limited. Can I update on other things?
Yeah.
The chair of the Diversity Council. On my notes they say the deputy chair, director of QBE and Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. Now, we've also got in the room Miriam Silver, who's a wonderful board member from CEDA, and I'm just going to take this opportunity to thank the board members here and to just say I'm very blessed by having a fantastic board who, among other things, have been incredibly supportive over the last 18 months or so. But now, straight into conversation. Pradeep, in the spirit of one of these things is not like the others on stage, I'm going to start with you. And you can take that however you like.
I'll take it well.
I said in my opening comments, to reference that, the economy was in good shape. I think there's pretty strong consensus on this. The recovery's been strong. The data is, quite frankly, incredible. Nothing what we would have expected 12 months ago. And that's everything from, GDP, unemployment, to some of the forward-looking indicators like business confidence, consumer confidence, et cetera, but if you peel the first layer back, there are some signs of challenge, if you like. And I'm thinking about business investment, and languishing productivity. What's top of your list from a business and sort of economy perspective are the things that we need to do in Australia to drive greater economic dynamism?
Thanks for that, Melinda. What a story we've got. We had 29 years of growth, then COVID hit. So that 29 years is a great story. The response to COVID is a great story, and we should give credit where it's due to our businesses who managed to get through that, families who managed to get through that, and governments who, I think, sprang to attention and did a great job in helping drive the economy through that period. And what we've seen since then is the economy roaring back. But one of the things that we have to be careful about with an economy roaring back is I think it is masking some of the things that were underway in the economy pre-COVID and which are still with us today. And so the point I kind of make talking to groups is that bounce back does not equal recovery, because the world is changing. And if we look at trend growth rates over the last 50 years, Melinda, you see that they're consistently coming down. And what that tells us is that the things that drove growth 50, 60 years ago aren't doing their work anymore. So the task we have is, what are the new sources of growth? What are the new drivers of productivity? And one of the tragedies of the last 20 years, I think, is that productivity has become a bit of a dirty word. And I think we need to reclaim that, because productivity is how we build prosperity. And so if we see kind of these trend rates coming down and we realise that our task is to find the new source of growth, the question is, where do we find it? Well, we find it from all that disruption that is taking place right now. Because the economy, not just here but around the world, we are at an inflection point, because there are things driving the economy, whether it's technology, whether it's things about climate, whether it's real or perceived sense of inequality. whether it's the way we're changing our view of work, whether it's the role of mental health, now not just some side social issue, but actually a core economic issue. These things are all hitting us at the same time. And so the question for us is, so where are we going to invest? How are we going to discover these new sources of productivity? And the answer to that, I think, really is in how we adapt, how we innovate. And I don't mean innovation in the traditional sense of, the science sector, etc., but in problem solving. And to do that, you have to have a humility of mind, right? That we don't know all of the answers. And this is something I think you can scale from, an individual to a community, to an organisation, to management, to the economy. And so that is where we will find the dynamism in the economy, and that's particularly true in the business sector.
I think there's something really interesting in what you're saying there, because if business and government, if all of us don't do something different, we're not going to get the best outcome. So when you talk about masking, when I was doing merger integration work with McKinsey and transformation work in the banking industry, it always struck me how lacking in curiosity people often were. They wouldn't ask the 5 whys, why is this so? And I always found that I could get great insights by just increasing the frequency with which I looked at a number. So if it was a quarterly thing, I look at it monthly or weekly and see how it's really travelling. And also digging down one layer deeper, because then you remove the masking that happens in numbers. And I think we're in a place like that, Melinda, where we all need to look at our businesses, look at the things we're stewarding and say, do I really know enough about this, given the uncertainty that we're facing? And how can I strip away to the next level of detail and just look at this more frequently so that I see the patterns? And what's actually going on is a lot of people are saying, it's all too uncertain, I'll think about that later. Exactly the wrong response.
So let me ask this question to all of you, because each of you brings a perspective from business. Last week, the IMD World Competitiveness rankings were released. CEDA partners with IMD on those. For people who missed them, Australia's ranking dropped 4 places to the lowest level in 25 years. And it was really interesting because in conversation with the IMD, one of the things that they said was they're sort of struggling to reconcile the really strong results for current economic performance with this decline in the index overall. And the thing that was driving it were actually the components that relied on business leaders themselves answering the questions around their own perceptions of business. Managerial capability, so the concerns that they had about a whole bunch of characteristics around competitiveness, that they themselves were scoring business down. And I'm just wondering, how you reflect on that in terms of the businesses that you're seeing, or the sort of the things that you're seeing around the economy. How do we shift that if our own businesses are sort of saying we don't have what it takes? Like, how do we change that dynamic?
I might have a first stab at this.
You get to go.
All right. I got to say, who'd be a manager these days, right? I mean, senior managers are staring into the abyss of disruption, hitting them all the time. And I think this is a real issue that we've got to kind of deal with. Recognising that actually there are, we talk about transitions taking place, but they're taking place in the plural. It's multiple transitions taking place at the same time. And so that's, I think, playing into this question of managerial capability. But I would say that one thing is this, and that is we have become far too risk averse in management. And I think that is partly driven by short-termism, partly driven by the fact that the world around us has changed quite a lot. And what we have done in terms of our management practices, we've created bubbles. We tend to hire people who look and think like us. Why? Because that's the quickest way to get the job done today, if you have people who think like you, who act like you. And so I think 2 things. One is the risk averseness we've got to shift, and the second is we've got to examine the bubbles that we create around us.
Can I disagree?
You go.
Now is the time to be a manager and a leader. There sometimes are not many opportunities afforded to people who look different like me. And in my career, what I've always found is that it's in that moment of crisis when they really need that different thinking, that there is an opportunity put forward that you might be able to take, which in any other time would not be afforded to you. It is absolutely risky. It is, what they call the glass cliff in many circumstances, but it is the moment to grasp, to make a difference. And I think why in terms of, why would we mark ourselves down? There is a bias in how we approach leadership, I find, in this country that is very much what we know. We will only do what we know. And difference is seen as risk, when it's actually the opportunity that becomes the greatest asset for an organisation. And I do find, I think, that in a moment of crisis, when you have to look at yourself in the mirror and you must do something differently, you cannot approach COVID the same way you've approached any other crisis, that is the moment you can learn and do things differently going forward as well. The bias we all have, and all of us has this. I've learnt to lead in a situation pre-COVID, probably fourth industrial revolution. Post-COVID, fifth industrial revolution does not need the leadership skills that I might have learnt in the past, and we have to evolve and change. And the question is, can we? Do we want to? Or does the 26 years of economic growth mean that we can be complacent and not feel like we have to change? The cost to the country, you can see, is immense.
I'd answer it in a different way, and I think both of these guys are on the money. But in thinking about the managerial capability that's needed in the companies that I'm involved with, the access to managerial capability for Australian companies was global. We had learnt a set of skills about being an open economy, and I think it was one of the reasons why we have been able to punch above our weight for such a long time, was that we did develop these global connections. And we talk about Australian companies not being very good at going offshore, but boy, we were good at sucking partnerships into this country. I'll just give you one example. As Melinda said, I'm on the board of AGL Energy, and we look at the issues that are going on in Victoria at the moment with the Yallourn mine and the problems with the power station there because of the weather. Now, normally when something went bad like that, there would be a raft of German engineers on a plane. There'd be a bunch of people that would come out of the mine industry, probably somewhere in Arkansas and West Virginia, and we would use those globally available skills. Can't do that anymore. It's become incredibly expensive. You can't get them to come at the time that you need them. And so I think some skills that we've learnt to bolster and extend and leverage capabilities that we have are just now not available to us. And I think we're seeing people feeling uncertain and uncomfortable about that dynamic. So I think that's one window into why people might be marking themselves down on managerial capability. And I think we are going to have to learn to be more reliant within our borders, but it's not something those German engineers on those turbines, they've been doing it for 30 years. There's no real, substitute for that experience, and it doesn't work as well over Zoom. It's pretty hard to crawl inside the turbine, even if you send the drone in there. It's just not the same.
I think it's really interesting because there have been some really good examples too. I know I was talking to BHP in South Australia who had to manage shutdowns and things like that in very different ways because they didn't have labour mobility, and they were able to do it. So I think there's actually some really great lessons in there. But I think one of the things we're going to have to work really hard to do is actually capture those lessons, because I think there's a bit of a sense that the things that we wanted to keep from COVID are just going to stay with us without us really working hard for them. And I actually think that's unlikely. I think if we want to hold on to changes, we actually have to really hold on to them and be very explicit about it. But there are definitely some other issues that have emerged that have highlighted, I think, some vulnerabilities for us that we probably weren't fully aware of. And, you know, people in the audience will know we do a lot of work on immigration at CEDA, and I think, you know, we have become acutely aware of the extent to which we rely on immigration, not just permanent, but also temporary, whether it's backpackers working or whatever else. And it's something that I think we're going to have to front into really seriously around what we think the right approach is for the future. Let me just loop back on risk, and Ming, particularly, you know, really impassioned plea from you around, you know, this is a moment to be thinking about doing things differently, taking risk. You know, I was talking over drinks before dinner. I think everyone's talking about how Australia's managing COVID now. And I referenced vaccine rollout in my comments, and there's been a lot of comments about quarantine, and I know border closures is possibly a bit of a sensitive point up here on the stage as well. You know, I think when you look back, the way we responded and the way governments responded was fantastic, and they did things that they didn't normally do, and things that really went against the grain. Is it too much to expect that we change again? And do you think we're capable of that sort of pace of change and taking risk? So at the beginning, it was like, I mean, it was really unknown. It still is to a certain extent, although there's more known pieces now. Can we continue to take the same risk and continue to do things differently? Or having set the pattern, are we stuck there?
Well, why not? You know, why can we not change as much as we have? Do we always need a crisis to force us to look at ourselves and address some issues? You listed all of those things just before, you know, the closing the gap, just tax reform. We have addressed nothing. Where have we progressed on all of those really fundamental issues that underpin the success of our country? We haven't addressed it. We might have addressed a very short-term issue with COVID, and we should have learnt a lot of skills to help us address these more sort of medium to long-term issues. But why can we not, you know, do more of that innovation within our public policy to try different things? I know certainly within some of the boards I've been on, we used almost COVID as an excuse to leap ahead, to say, hey, we are going to do this, and I know it's going to be risky, and I know it's a little bit out there. It's not where we thought we were going to be in the next year, but it was like on our 3-year, 5-year horizon. Let's leap ahead. And we knew that if it wasn't going to go well, we could ask for forgiveness, because this was the time when people would forgive you, but at least we had a go. It came off like brilliantly when we actually took that moment, you know, thoughtfully looked at the risk, managed all of that, and leapt ahead. We should do that again. And this is the thing that frustrates me so much about Australia, is that there's so much capability already here. We have so many things going for us, and the lucky country, we are bloody lucky, but we don't harness half of what we are able to do.
It's a bit of an imagination problem, isn't it? I think we have an imagination deficit in this country. And I remember it coming home to me very clearly when I was watching one of our political leaders, and this is actually quite a few years ago. I think everyone knew that unemployment benefit was too low in this country. Now it's had a little bit of an improvement after we came off JobSeeker, probably still not to the level that it needs, but you ask, you know, every economist, and they always say it was too low. And that if people with those very low, below poverty line incomes actually get given more money, they will spend it, and therefore it is good for the economy. And there was this one particular political leader who suddenly found himself with 2 families, and all of a sudden money became a bit tight. And he made some comments about, now I understand what it's like not to have enough money to go around, and therefore maybe I better have a bit of a rethink about where the unemployment benefit should sit. And I remember thinking, are we so lacking in empathy and imagination that you couldn't work out that this level of unemployment benefit was just set way too low? And I think we do a lot of that, lack of imagination.
Is it convenient, though, to just ignore it? Because it's a part of the society that you just think, well, I'm just going to shove you over there
No,
because
I
I'm just
think
going
there's
to
actually this sort of lack of empathy to be able to understand what it's like for people that are not like you. You know,
And why is it, do you think, in our country we have to have the personal experience to then have that empathy?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. You should be able to imagine it. You should be able to put yourself in other people's shoes. And I think this is one of the very important skills that leaders and managers need to have going forward. And we see now that our community expects business leaders to have this ability. And when they don't display it, they really get, hit hard. And when they don't respond appropriately to that feedback, they get double hit hard. So it's becoming a very important part of the kit bag.
So let me grab on. I've obviously got to get control back here, don't I? Otherwise I'm not going to drive this bus much longer. You can see why it's fun having Diane on the board, can't you? Like not 2 minutes in and we're already referencing newly anointed politicians.
I think you may have misunderstood, perhaps.
But let me try to draw a bit of a thread back to, obviously one of the things that we're really focused on in the work that we're doing is looking at workforces, workplaces, and thinking about, how we do a better job of that, whether it's through a more effective immigration program to doing work on aged care workforce and the like. But I think one of the things that we've seen over the last year, to kind of come from empathy, I think there has been a much more explicit conversation in the workplace around issues that perhaps we haven't talked about as much directly, and there has been a lot more very direct sort of referencing of how people are coping with work from home, having kids at home, mental health, the uncertainties and all the rest of it, and actually demonstrating more flexibility and agility than we have previously. A bit more can-do, if I can put it that way. Diane, how are you seeing that playing out? What do you expect to stick? In terms of, is this something that in 12 months' time we're going to look back and go, well, that was nice, but now we're all back doing the same old, same old? And what are you seeing in the labour market more broadly? I know we've had some conversations around wages, so a big question, and then I'll bring Pradeep and Ming in as well.
Yeah, so look, obviously flexibility and working from home has proved to be way less risky than anybody thought it was going to be. There's obviously a lot of problems with it that come up and make it difficult around some of the collaboration pieces and, people who may be at home alone, that are then become a sole worker in a remote sense is a very different thing for people to deal with. But this is another one of those COVID things that's been accelerated. We were heading in this direction. I think Australia's also been a real leader in understanding that safe workplaces are not just physically safe but psychosocially safe. So mental health at work and the mental health first aid was already a trend that we were well ahead of. So I think the ability to have that conversation that you talked about, that really courageous conversation where you're prepared to talk to your people about the work method that they want to use. And obviously a lot of this is more relevant for people with professional workforces that come to, the high-rise office, because if you're digging coal out of the Loy Yang mine, you've still got to actually go to the Loy Yang mine to do that. And that in and of itself does create some problems for us, because that divide between those with the clean jobs and those with the dirty jobs, I think has been exacerbated by the experiences we've had, and we've got a lot better at talking to our white-collar workforces, if you will, and not had the same amount of development across our blue-collar workforces, and we need to put some, real thinking time into it. But the big issue that I'm hearing over and over again now, and I was talking to Alison Kitchen from KPMG just before, we came up at the panel, is wages, and we just hear that wages aren't going anywhere. They're flat, there's still no wages growth. But I reckon that if I asked all of the members in the room who've got a workforce, they'd say, actually, wages are only going in one direction, it's this way, and it's actually pretty rapid. So to my earlier comments about the why, and looking at things on a more frequent cycle and digging down a couple of layers, I think we've got some real averaging issues with these wages, because everyone is telling me that the stats that are coming out centrally are just not keeping up with the reality. Now, maybe it's partly because I'm from Western Australia, and so I'm seeing that real boom happening over there, and maybe it's Alison's professional services bubble, where there seems to be a lot of churn going on and, you know, sort of 25% type turnover rates and so forth. But I do think there is something, you know, very unusual going on with that wage dynamic. And so when you take the new ways of working together with the need for very different employee value propositions to keep up with this sort of wages explosion in certain parts of the economy, I think we all need to be very careful about the decisions we're making, that we don't embed really overblown cost structures and ways of working into our businesses. We think very carefully. But I do think most of the flexibility is going to stick. And hopefully the conversations that we have with our people will stick too.
Pradeep, you look like you want to lean in on this.
You know, when COVID hit, we all connected our people in our workforces, you know, Zoom and Teams, etc. But what we've all discovered as that has gone on, that is something that is an underlying trend that was there before COVID, which was the more connected we were getting, the more lonely we were also getting. And it's a different type of loneliness. And it's an issue that is affecting productivity. And so while flexible arrangements come into place, which is great at one level, what we're doing at its core is blurring the social construct line between home and work. And that will play out in ways that we haven't really thought about. And I think that's one of the things, as we think about productivity, flexible work arrangements, hybrid working, we've got to think about some of those deeper things that are going on, that blurring of work and home, and what that really means for the good life, you know, the well-being of people.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and some of you may have heard me say this already, but, you know, I think there's this really interesting conversation that's been going around about, you know, the fact that we held up productivity through COVID and we all went and worked from home and everyone remained as productive as they were previously. Now, of course, we all know that a lot of people were working longer hours, but I think also for anyone who manages teams, they were spending, in particular, a lot more hours of work. So having to invest in actually making those Zoom team meetings work and then kind of doing that for the bulk of the day and then kind of clocking off on their teamwork and then doing their own work later on at night. And I think there is a whole group of people for whom productivity didn't improve at all, but in fact they just actually increased their hours of work, and they did a pretty good job of it. But when you think about how we manage this for years more, there is, to your point, Ming, I think a whole new set of capabilities about how you actually make this work and how we collaborate online in a sustainable way, which doesn't involve basically leaning on managers to bring the energy and bring the structure and to be working so hard to bring people in.
So I think just one point on that. Well, I think we'll have what needs to happen post-COVID, or even now, we should be in it now. We have to redefine what leadership looks like. We have to redefine our expectations of leadership, what they do, the upskilling of what leaders have within the characteristics of themselves. So they naturally must have a built-in empathy in their DNA, because there's no friggin' hell you can teach it. It's very hard to teach it. So we are really needing to see that evolution of leadership much faster than we've ever seen it before. And it's a good thing.
So I know that one of the things you and I have talked about, Ming, now, when you look at Ming's CV, you're going to think that she's just a numbers boffin, right? You're going to look at her and think that she comes into the board meeting and all she does is focus on the numbers, and there is a little bit of that.
Well, you asked me to. I'm the chair of the audit committee.
I know. But actually, there's a real passion there for more than that. And we've had conversations, for instance, around measuring what you value. So how do we do things differently from now in thinking about how we measure what we value, how we think about strong and vibrant community, a strong and vibrant society, and what do we have to do differently to bring that perhaps a bit more into the centre of our conversations? And just to sort of prolong this a little bit, I mean, again, we saw great examples through COVID of things that we did differently. You know, we found homes for homeless people because we were worried about the homeless people and what they might mean for us, to be blunt. But we found solutions for that, yet they seem to sort of have gone by the by now. So, you know, what's on your wish list there?
I mean, if I can start off with one of the worst things I think economists has imposed on the world is the concept of GDP and measuring everything in accordance to GDP and the world of GDP and the God of GDP. And I cannot stand that measurement because it measures nothing that is important to us as a society. So first of all, I would love that change. So there was, I think Justin Wolfers was speaking at CEDA recently. I loved it because it was almost like he was saying, let's measure love, you know. It's like, yeah, I know that sounds really...
Okay, sorry, that's just not CEDA policy in case anyone's plugged.
But the
that's not today's announcement.
But the concept of measuring what is important, our employees' well-being, we do that in organisations. We look at how... you know, we're treating our people and, you know, what's important to them and how hard they're working, making sure they're not working 24/7. But the one thing that really did, I think, we're at risk of losing, you've talked about it already, is like when we think about homelessness and making sure that we're making sure that they have a home, because that's one of the first, we all know, the studies are all there, that we give people, you know, certain fundamental things that they require to live and survive, you'll actually find that they will find a path back to prosperity and back to, say, Middle Australia. And so not to lose sight of social cohesion. So we also saw through COVID that, you know, the streak of racism within Australia is absolutely there. You know, you and I have talked about the impact that has on ethnic Australians or people who look different from that perspective, and having to deal with that level of aggression but still fighting for what you know think is best for the country, people questioning your loyalty. You know, am I allowed to be up here on the CEDA stage? You're going to question my loyalty to the country in the back of your mind whenever I talk about trying to progress the success of Australia. You know, we also saw, there was research we did at Diversity Council Australia that, and it was titled Class at Work, and it feeds into a lot the stuff that CEDA's done in the past as well, but for the first time we saw in our research that more than any other diversity dimension, your class will determine whether you feel included at work. This is your socio-economic, your education, your intergenerational privilege that you have. More than anything, more than gender, culture, anything. It is a thing that determines whether you feel like you belong in the organisation you work at. And if we really don't address those issues, especially when we've got a skill shortage coming through, you know, Alison, I do feel for you, but chartered accountants, we are advocating to get more accountants in the country to help you. But we have a skill shortage here. And if we are not looking at those different people that in other times you would ignore, you are going to have a problem. So that's why I do think that COVID presents an opportunity for us to see the cracks in our social structures and think, okay, I will make a different decision so that we create a better future for our country. Yes, for my organisation, but also for our country, because the benefits long term is unlimited, I feel.
I'm going to pause here for a second because I'm looking around the audience. I know it's dinner time and no one really wants to get their phones out, but I'm staring at my screen. I've got no questions, and you can see that we will talk all night up here. So if you do have a question, please shoot it through. If not, we're just going to keep going. We'll finish in about 10 minutes, so you've got a little bit of time if you've got a burning question for anyone.
We may start asking you questions. That would be the other
we could do
option.
a poll.
I have been known to do that in the past. We could do a poll.
Show of hands on who thinks wages are going up.
Actually, that would be interesting. Who thinks wages are flatlining on growth, or does anyone see wages going up? Is anyone else with me? Actually, not,
What was the
not as
question?
wages going up.
Yep, without a doubt.
Yeah, quite a few hands, but not quite as many as I thought.
I was going to say, Ming, you mentioned Justin Wolfers, and he made this comment in the live stream that I had to kind of question our own chief economist about, because he was a bit dismissive about the V-shaped recovery. And he did just say, well, we shouldn't really be celebrating a V-shape because what did you think was going to happen? I'm glad we kind of got that out in the open before the Treasurer arrives, because I somehow feel that would have been a bit of a dampener on the conversation with him if we just say, well, actually, no one thinks that it's a big deal. I've got a question. Thank you.
I thought it was also good to talk about wages growth before he got here as well. Yeah, all
I've
the
got a
things we want to
question
talk about before he gets here, now is the moment.
So the question is, should non-government actors get more active in incentivising vaccines?
Yes.
I think we all should get more active in incentivising vaccines.
So let's have that. So, and how? Is this no jab, no work? Get a jab, get a cup of coffee? What are we thinking?
Jab and you get a free lunch. Food seems to work really well in Australia, I find. You give people free food and they will come and,
Food, wine, a tinny?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Because at Zip, we have lunch on Thursdays and we have a check-in app because it's hot desking, and you can never get a check-in on Thursday because everyone's come for free lunch. Obviously, one of the problems we've got is we don't have a lot of data yet about the efficacy of the vaccines and how they behave for protecting people and stopping transmission and so forth. And so given the way our work health and safety laws operate, and we have those identify hazards and remove them as much as is reasonably practicable, at the moment a vaccine ain't a reasonably practicable control. So there's not really a basis for a workplace to turn around and say you can't come here if you haven't had a jab unless you get a public health order over the top of it. So that's how aged care can require their workers to have flu vaccine, because there's been enough experience to show that if you're vaccinated against the flu, you're less likely to get it, less likely to transmit it. And the same, people can't go into aged care unless they can prove their flu vaccine. And I've got to say they've certainly tightened up on that in my personal experience. So, I cannot see why anywhere where you're required to have a flu vaccine, even though we don't have the truly definitive science on it yet, we would feel uncomfortable with extending the need for a COVID vaccine. I think that would be a really important part of it.
I've got another question that relates to vaccines, but before we go there, I'm going to ask the panel. And by the way, if anyone in the room knows the answer to this question, feel free to jump up and shout it out, or come and tell me. I'm really fascinated by the fact that other issues are not, or other opportunities aren't being pursued here. So now I'm going to give away some trade secrets here. I was having my hair cut the other night. My hairdresser's German. He has family in Germany, and he was telling me his sister went to the shop, got a case of beer, and got a free rapid COVID test with it. Right, so two 6-packs and you get a free rapid test. And then
in Australia, get a jab, get free beer.
Well, but why?
No, I think it was going in the other direction. You buy the beer and it comes with a COVID test.
But why? I don't understand why we don't talk about rapid testing and things like that, because his point was that there are a lot of service businesses there that are requiring rapid testing before you come in, and it's a matter of minutes. You get tested, you come in, and they're not shutting down. It just doesn't seem to be part of the conversation here, and I don't.
You could do that at Bunnings. I mean, my God, before you walk in, because there's a huge.
Ian Bailey's here from Kmart. Where are you, Ian? You're out there somewhere. Have we thought about that? Are we going to be doing rapid tests at Kmart? You could probably source them. Very good supply chain Kmart has. I'm sure we've all noticed it. And wasn't it horrible when it got disrupted about 12 months ago? Not happy, Jan.
Because the other, I mean,
But
the other
it's
question-
right. We're not being very expansive, are we?
Yeah,
And
I
I
mean,
think it's because we're going for this almost elimination without saying that's what we're doing.
It just seems that we're very binary in the approach at the moment. And the next question is really about whether we've considered the cost of closures versus incentives for vaccinations. And I don't know, I'm sure there's considerations of these things, but it does, in the public domain anyway, it does feel like it is very binary in the approach at the moment, sort of open, closed, and that seems to be about it.
Melinda, part of that is we have too many binary discussions. You're for this or against this. Like, we don't have enough of a culture of debate on key issues. We self-censor, we are censored, we're too scared. I see this in our own workplace where people try and second guess the boss. They try and give you, in professional services, and people, this is a real issue with our young people. How do you get ahead? Do you question someone, or do you create something new, or do you just go with the flow? Right? And I think there's something deeper around why we're not coming up with innovative solutions that goes to our ability to speak and think.
Did you see, I just did it. Remember a little while ago I said, let's get it all out before the Treasurer gets here. We better not say that in front of him, don't want to upset him. What was that all about?
So and let me put an idea out there. And I was having a tax conversation, including someone who's in the room tonight, so I won't name them, but we were talking about tax reform, right? Now, gosh, who wants to have that conversation again? But we need to, right? We absolutely need to. And the point that was made is that a lot of the tax reform debate seems to spend a lot of time debating a particular view on a solution rather than what we want to address or the issue. So do we need to just... And I think that's where some of the, I'm for it or I'm against it kind of mentality comes from. It's not... No one's for disadvantage. No one's for all these things, but then we seem to dig in on for or against a particular solution. So how do we change that?
I mean, first of all, you need to have a certain level. I know within organisations, you must have a certain level of psychological safety and safe to be able to talk about crazy things. So, in my teams in the past, what I've said to them is like, look, we're in the middle of a crisis. Use the crisis as an example. I need really different thinking here. I need the best of your solutions. And, the crazier sometimes the better, because you just never know what might come out of it in the discussion. But, I don't promise you will do anything. And 99 times out of 100, we probably won't implement it, but let's at least have the discussion. And that was so useful, because what that did was it created an environment within the team that I was leading to really be crazy and to express things that they would think, oh my God, they're going to think I'm so stupid for saying this. I gave them permission to do it. And I started off with, the most quietest person in the room before anybody else, definitely before me. You get the quietest person to talk first, because some of those people have the deepest level of thinking, and you need that thinking on the table. So there are so many things you can do, but on a more sort of global scale, or on a country scale, if we elevate to that level, what is not helpful a lot of times is the media cycle, the social media elements that really can pull out the trolls, and they give them the platform, and it feels like they have bigger voice than they actually do. And that does not help with a safe discussion around these really nutty issues that we have to grapple with.
Melinda, there's actually, at times we've probably been a bit too negative about, the state of things, but there's some really positive things. And we've got to look for the examples of them, right? If you think about how in the space of 12 months, right, the world came up with a COVID vaccine, right? It didn't come about just because one or two people didn't talk to other people, didn't create the right climate of experimentation and innovation and discourse. Actually, they did, right? And they created really vibrant communities that questioned, that allowed experiments to take place, and we solved something, right? You look at, we've got some great companies doing really innovative things. We have some great leaders doing innovative things, right? So there is actually a lot of positivity that we can draw on around us if we just open our eyes and look.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, I think it's a point really well made, and it's certainly the perspective from which many of the issues are, well, all of the issues that we raise at CEDA are framed. And I think it's a really good point to make sure they don't come across as too negative, because it's not from a perspective of wanting to be negative, it's from the perspective of seeing having a view about how good we could be. And we won't get time to talk about this because we're going to run out of time, but I'll park it here for now. But this is the approach that we want to take at CEDA around the conversation around climate change. That it seems that because we don't know the perfect path, we're reluctant to sort of talk about it or to commit to it, or yet there are good things being done. There are good tech investments being made. There are good approaches being developed. We are doing okay compared to, I mean, I was talking to someone today, we are reducing emissions. And so why do we have to why is the narrative cast in a negative sense rather than actually acknowledging the progress we're making, which some would argue is as good as other countries, and why not own it and then say, well, let's try to do better. Let's try to do better. Here's a question, it's the most voted on question, and it's the one we'll finish on, if that's okay. Speaking about ideological and social obstacles to long-term prosperity, could it be that the tall poppy syndrome is an obstacle in Australia?
I would suggest that our cultural norms about the roles of men versus the roles of women are a much bigger barrier towards moving towards the best economic outcomes in this country. But I do think the tall poppy syndrome is not something that does us any favours and is alive and well here. But if I had to pick the biggest one, to me it's still that issue that we don't get the most out of all of our people.
Complacency is the biggest one. It's just so comfortable. If you come from another country and you live in Australia, you realise this is the best place in the world, and we can just get really used to it. And so complacency to me is the biggest barrier.
I do think the tall poppy syndrome exists, except that it isn't applied equally across genders. Definitely is not applied equally across race. Definitely we've seen things, with First Nations people, how they've been treated. And, I do think there is a lot of class at work as well.
Well, thanks for that. And I knew that what was going to happen was that there's going to be a rush of questions at the end. I have got a long list of questions here now. They're fantastic questions around the risks around keeping our borders closed, speaking of complacency, until Christmas 2022, which is the latest sort of floating commentary. Comments about the resources sector and the sort of the resources trap, and a few others. I'm going to keep a record of these and try to make sure we weave them into our conversations over the next couple of days. So if you're joining us, look out for an answer to your question. It's dinner time and I'll be back up on stage around 8:15 with the Treasurer. I do have to just say that Peter Welling, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Serco, here on the front table, will be up and introducing the Treasurer after dinner, so you can look forward to that. Thanks for the late flush of questions. Thank you to my panellists. What an interesting conversation. See you soon.